Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod and patronize me. This week's episode features a return guest. Fred Kaplan was on the show about 3 years ago when his book, The Insurgents, David Petraeus and the Plot to Change the American Way of War was out. Now he has a new book, similar vein, I guess, and I was really looking forward to talking with him about it. It's called Dark Territory, The Secret History of Cyber War, published by Simon & Schuster. Dark Territory it's fantastic. It's this deep look into the world of computer warfare and its implications, but not just, I'm not sure quite how to put this. I guess the big thing to understand is that there is no other country that's so cyber-oriented as America in terms of how connected we are to the internet, the way our systems work, our utilities, banking system, communications, all that stuff. And that means there probably isn't another country that's so vulnerable to attacks on those systems. And Fred does this really great job of showing how the rapid adoption of cyber systems evolved and how a lot of different groups are focused on either attacking or defending it. Fred's really great at finding stories and not just dry facts, and there are a lot of great ones in Dark Territory. There's a human aspect to all this. Partly there's a military understanding. The moment a military person hears about all the great stuff you can do offensively with cyber warfare, it usually takes them a few minutes to realize that all of those things could also be done to them. And Fred kind of brings us through those stories over the decades, talks about the people who first illuminated the vulnerabilities we have, the ways that the NSA has evolved over the years to try to deal with this stuff while also handling civil liberties in America. It's really a marvelous book, and there's some fantastic stories in there. Things that may keep you up at night. And I say that as somebody who grew up in the late days of the Cold War when we were, always on the verge of nuclear war or something. This is not as visibly apocalyptic, but when we really think about what it could all mean, Dark Territory, I think, is a really important book for our time. So, while Fred and I discussed this book, there was also a sense, and we talk about it during our conversation, in which some of the revelations that came out of Dark Territory kind of go back and revise a little bit of his David Petraeus book. It's kind of neat seeing how these things work along the continuum, what we know, what we don't know, what we learn down the line, and how it colors our sense of history. So go get Dark Territory by Fred Kaplan. Fantastic book. Is also relatively quick. It's about 300 pages, and if you're a geek like me, you're going to just burn right through this and want to read more. It's such a rapidly evolving space that there's so much to talk about within it. So I was really happy to sit down with Fred to talk about this stuff. So we'll get right to the conversation. Here's a brief version of Fred's bio. You can find a longer one at fredkaplan.info, I-N-F-O. Fred Kaplan is the national security columnist for Slate and the author of Dark Territory, The Secret History of Cyber War, as well as 4 other books, including The Wizards of Armageddon, 1959, Daydream Believers, and most recently, The Insurgents, David Petraeus and the Plot to Change the American Way of War, which was a New York Times bestseller and Pulitzer Prize finalist. A former Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Boston Globe, Fred graduated from Oberlin College, earned a Ph.D. from MIT, and lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Brooke Gladstone. He's also a jazz columnist, which comes up later in our talk. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Fred Kaplan. What got you started on Dark Territory?
Well, two of my last books were about... The first book that I ever wrote, The Wizards of Armageddon, was about the small group of intellectuals who invented nuclear strategy and how that became policy. My last book before this one, The Insurgents, was about the small group of army intellectuals who revived counterinsurgency strategy. So when I was done with that book, or when it was about to come out, my editor at Simon & Schuster, Alice Mayhew, said, well, what's the latest thing? What's the new thing in warfare? And I said, well, this cyber thing might be something. Well, what's that? And I told her a bit. Quite honestly, I didn't know a whole lot myself. I'd read a couple of books about it. I'd read some things. I talked with a few people. I wasn't that acquainted. But I left the office with a mission to go out and see if there was a book here. Mm-hmm. And I spent a few months doing preliminary interviews with people. You know, I'm not interested in, wasn't at the time interested in doing, a Brookings Institution type book on cyber war or cyber vulnerability. I like to write narrative nonfiction. You know, is there a story here? Yeah. Is there a history? Are there characters in it, some of whom at least go through the story a bit? And after a couple of months of doing, not intensive, but, a couple trips down to Washington, talked with several people, I said, yeah, okay, there is a story here. And the more I got into this story, I also realized that, it was a legitimate thing. A few years ago, there were a lot of people who thought, oh, this whole cyber thing, it's all hyped up. It's by people who have firms that do cybersecurity. They're
consultants.
They're exaggerating, and it's all a lot of bullshit, But, I don't think anybody would say that today. And I got a taste very early on that this was a real thing, and that it's been known to be a real thing for quite a long time.
Yeah, what was your moment of conversion? Was there a particular story that, holy crap, nailed you?
Well, one of it was when I discovered that there were serious people worried about this problem as far back as the dawn of the internet, as far back as the late 60s. Now, one reason they were worried about it, as I discovered a little bit later, is that we had been doing this kind of thing to other countries for quite a while. I mean, even before computers, with radio transmissions or microwave emissions or phone conversations.
I was going to say tapping the phone lines in Berlin.
We'd been doing this kind of thing and getting into networks to the extent there were networks for a long time. And at some point, somebody says, oh, wait a minute, if we can do this to them, they can do it to us. I mean, actually, that revelation came, I was talking with someone who had been very high and very senior in a couple of intelligence agencies, and I showed him a declassified document of one of the very first studies about the vulnerability of our computer networks, and laying out scenarios of how they could be attacked or interfered with by terrorists, by foreign governments, by criminals. And he said, well, look, the thing you have to realize about documents like these and scenarios like these is that we were already doing stuff like this to other people. Everything that you see in that document is a mirror image of what we were doing. And then somebody says, oh, Christ, maybe they can do it to us someday.
Yeah, that aha moment seems to occur again and again throughout the book.
It happens again and again.
And you get it with each president, each successive president from Reagan onwards
and
also.
Not just presidents, but, some NSA director. He'll come in and he'll look at all the shiny toys that he has and all the amazing things that they can do with it. And then it's like, oh, because it's not the Manhattan Project. You don't need a campus of brilliant physicists and a multi-billion-dollar budget like you're making an atomic bomb. You have a room full of computers and some people who are really good at using them.
That it's off-the-shelf technology. That's ultimately...
There's a World Wide Web.
Well, we'll jump all the way to the end. What have you learned post-book, post-publication that...
Well, one story that I wish I would have put in here, but I didn't learn about it till after the fact. Well, just a little backup. The first part of the basic idea I do have, which is that even within the military, which is more secure than any other part of society, they realize, the bad guys are going to get in. I mean, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop trying to make better locks and better burglar alarms, so to speak, but you've got to assume they're going to get in, and therefore the important things, and there was a Pentagon study that stated this explicitly a few years ago that is in the book, that it says, you should focus on detection because, on average, something like 7 months go by before people even know that they've been hacked. And resilience. In other words, once you've been damaged, be able to repair quickly. But they're also taking other steps. And for example, one thing I learned is that the Navy is now training its people on ships once again to use sextants to navigate by the stars.
Really?
Because they figure that in the event of war, the data link to the GPS satellites might be cut off, might be hacked, in which case these guys are going to be running around in the ocean, not even knowing where they are, much less where the enemy is and how to fire this missile that relies on, GPS-guided electronics. So there are things like that going on. Air wings in the Air Force that are set aside, specially trained using no fancy gear, and they step into action to perform missions of the A team performing this mission can't do it anymore because all their stuff relies on networks.
And the analog kids.
Yeah. So, at least some people are taking it seriously. That's kind of an interesting thing.
Now, you mentioned the through line of the three military-related books that you've done. Within Dark Territory, there's the realization or the revelation that the role of cyber war in the surge in Iraq it was unstated at the time and may have been very, very dramatic.
Even now.
Yeah, which I was also going to ask you about how that managed to make its way into the book.
Well, people tell me things.
Yeah.
No, but it's true, and I did not know.
It doesn't come up in the previous book on Petraeus and counterinsurgency.
I didn't know about it.
Which makes me wonder, as you answer this, it also makes me wonder whether this book, in a sense, is a revision of that previous work or a greater understanding, how it informs that
chapter. That chapter is. What you're referring to is a chapter where I reveal that, in 2007, the Iraq War kind of had a turnaround. U.S. started getting better. The insurgents started getting killed in greater volumes. People started getting co-opted. In a tactical sense, the war was spinning in a different direction. And the conventional wisdom is that this was due in part to George W. Bush's troop surge, and in part to General David Petraeus's new counterinsurgency strategy and various kinds of manipulations that he performed in the service of that. And by the way, all of that is still true to some extent. It's not falsified. But the other key ingredient that I didn't know about is that the NSA got involved. Around late 2006, soldiers out in the field started capturing insurgent computers, and they sent them back to Fort Meade, headquarters of the NSA. And they hacked into them, and they found passwords and usernames and intercepted intelligence, communications. And then they decided just to send a whole NSA unit to Iraq. Over a 2 or 3 year period, there were 6,000 NSA officials in Iraq. 22 of them were killed. going out on expeditions with other soldiers to capture computers killed by roadside bombs. And so what they did, they would do things like this. They would intercept the communications. They would find more computers. And then they would send back phony messages from someone who's looks like it's an insurgent, but it's really them. They've hacked into his email. Mm-hmm. And they say, let's meet tomorrow at 4 o'clock at such and such a place. And waiting for them at 4 o'clock are some special operations soldiers who kill them. Hmm. And through 2007, 4,000 insurgents were killed in this manner. And it's not just that the insurgents were killed, but everybody starts getting freaked out. They kind of start realizing what's going on, so they can't trust what anybody is saying anymore. Yeah. They get a message, is this real? Is this from somebody else? So the whole command control of the insurgent apparatus starts falling apart with backbiting and distrust. And that played a very big role in what happened in 2007. There was one person that I sprang this on who knew about it, and he didn't tell me anything more, but he was kind of surprised that I knew, and he said, this is sort of, this kind of played the same role as in the Iraq War as breaking the German submarine code did in World War II, which you might remember was kept secret for decades after the war. Mm-hmm. It was not known. And so people came up with all these explanations of why the submarine war was going so well that really had very little to do with the real reason. Mm-hmm.
But eventually we'll get a PBS series just like Bletchley Park. So
I think so. That's right. That's right.
Can you characterize maybe the multiple, I would say, offensive capabilities of cyber war? You have this information war aspect. I know the book also goes into the infrastructure, potential to damage infrastructure, as well as directly taking out command and control. How do those, in a sense, feed each other?
Yeah, and also, it's not like this thing acts all by itself. Or it could, I suppose, just as you can take an airplane and just go bomb something. But in the context of a war, there were people when air power first started happening, when they said, we don't need soldiers on the ground anymore, we'll just use air power. Yeah. There are people now who say cyber is going to take care of everything. As it really evolves, it becomes another instrument, another what they call a domain of warfare, and it reinforces what's going on. And we already see instances of this, both in war and in diplomacy, or in a Cold War sort of thing. I mean, the most famous case now, of course, is Stuxnet, where a joint U.S.-Israeli project to hack into the computer system that controlled the speed at which centrifuges were spinning at the Iranian Natanz plant, which was enriching uranium, that busted up centrifuges and retarded their nuclear program by a few years. But there are also other things which are less well known. When Russia invaded Georgia in 1998, I guess. No, I'm sorry, in 2008.
No, it's around 2008 with the Olympics. That was,
2008. Yeah. When they invaded Georgia, yes, they came in with tanks. They came in with ships offshore. They came in with airplanes. But they also came in with cyber. They shut down all of the Georgian networks. Georgian officers couldn't communicate with their soldiers. The ministries couldn't speak with their commanders. The foreign ministry couldn't send out the word to their diplomats in other countries to tell them what's going on. And, this had an intensifying effect on what you could call was the Russian blitzkrieg into Georgia. When a squadron of Israeli F-14s, when 4 Israeli F-15s bombed Syria's nascent nuclear reactor one night around the same time, penetrating 100 miles into Syrian territory. And even though the Syrian Air Force had a brand new Russian air defense system and there were people manning the radars that night, the city was bombed. They didn't see any planes at all. The reason for this is that there was kind of a U.S.-Israeli joint operation to hack into Syrian air defense. And the way they did this was to hack into the data link between the radars and the radar screens. So it's like that movie. What was that movie where...
I'm envisioning Hudson Hawk, which nobody else ever refers to, so it can't be that.
The movie where Keanu Reeves gets on board of a bus.
Oh, yeah, Speed.
Speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of redoes it. Maybe that's too obscure.
Yeah.
But the point is,
no, that's far less obscure.
These guys are looking at the screen, and they're seeing nothing.
Yeah.
Because a false signal is being fed to them, showing a blank radar screen. Not only that, the whole area was mic'd, so just to make sure, so that if somebody was saying, hey, there's some airplanes coming, Israeli intelligence would hear this.
Yeah.
There were also monitoring of, they could monitor the monitors, looking at the video emissions from the monitor just to make sure that they really weren't seeing anything. Because it was a dangerous thing, because as these airplanes were flying in, they were being painted by radar. And so the pilots are hearing ding, 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 and they've been told ahead of time, don't worry about it.
Trust us, you're good, it's
You're
okay.
okay, don't worry. So they wanted to make absolutely sure that they were okay, and they were. So that's an example of, then there are several, there were things like that happening in the air war against Yugoslavia, in what was going to be an air invasion of Haiti to dislodge the putschists before they just abandoned the scene entirely during Clinton administration. So yeah, it is now become a routine part of warfare. We have something called U.S. Cyber Command, which is a combatant command. It has a growing personnel. It's based in Fort Meade. It's commanded by the same four-star admiral or general who is the director of the NSA. It's headquartered at Fort Meade. And there are about 20 countries whose militaries have a cyber unit. Some are better than others, but
do we have rules of engagement?
Well, see, that's where the title of my book, Dark Territory, comes in. There are no rules of engagement. There's not even a concept about this. Since I mentioned the title, when Robert Gates became Secretary of Defense, in the last 2 years of Bush and then the first 2 years of Obama, he was getting these daily briefings about hackings into Defense Department networks, defense industries. And this wasn't anything formal, but he would talk to just people in the lobby, and he would say, we've got to do something about this. We've got to get the major cyber powers together and figure out some rules of the road. He'd come up through the CIA during the Cold War. He said, even in the bleakest days of the Cold War, there were rules. The Americans and Russians had rules like, we won't kill each other's spies, that kind of thing. And it's important. Got to do something like that here, too. For example, we won't do cyber attacks on dams or power grids.
Critical
infrastructure in peacetime, and maybe not even in wartime either. I don't know. But, and then he said, because we're wandering in dark territory here. And when I was going, this is my 5th book. Every time I've done a book, I'm going through my notes. I'm thinking, well, a title will emerge in the notes. It never does. It did in this time, and I said, wow, there's my title, Dark Territory. But then, I figured, well, I better look this up, see if it means something that I don't want to have on a book cover. Yeah. And it turned out that it's a term of art by North American railroads to designate a stretch of track that is not governed by signals. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a very powerful metaphor for cyberspace. And I sent Gates an email and asked him if he knew this. And he said, oh, yeah, sure. My grandfather was a station master on the Santa Fe Railroad for 50 years. We talked railroad terminology all the time when I was growing up. But so that's the situation where we're in. We are on a stretch of track called the World Wide Web that is ungoverned by signals. Nobody's watching. Everybody's watching, but there's no rules of the road, no Geneva Convention, internally we have, and these have been put up just in the last 15, 20 years, protocols, procedures, what do you do when you see something happening?
Yeah.
But nothing like, what international agency is to be contacted, what hotline number should you call to the Chinese or whatever. Nothing. There's nothing. In the Obama administration, there's been some talks with the Chinese, but it's kind of like talks to talk about what kind of forum might be set up
for a
in
commission
order to have talks to talk about what might be talked about. I mean, it's kind of at that level. And, when Gates said this, basically when he said all the cyber powers should get together, I mean, who are we talking about? We were talking about the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the French, the Israelis. That's about it. Now you've got the Iranians, North Koreans, Syrians. How are you going to bring these guys into some concert of Vienna to figure out rules of the road?
Beyond that, though, every other type of warfare you can have at least involves some sort of military apparatus, physical military equipment. This is something that literally
is invisible.
Yeah, this is something that we said is available conventionally off the shelf.
Yeah, and there is a military apparatus used. I mean, the Chinese, a lot of their hacks are done by some unit of the.
Well, I just mean it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have
these
to
are
be,
weapons that are available to.
And sometimes it's
us.
ambiguous at first who has even launched this attack. We're United States anyway. The NSA is getting a lot better at tracing this very quickly. At the beginning, though,
very happy because you pointed out with the Sony hack, because everyone was incredulous that they were able to say it was North Korea, and in your book you managed to explain why we knew it was North Korea and why they were so confident about it.
Yeah, and this isn't going to happen every time, but with the North Koreans, the NSA had thoroughly hacked into their networks, which, if you think about it, isn't much. I mean, they don't have much of a network.
Right. Thoroughly
hacked into it. It wasn't being monitored in real time. It wasn't like somebody at the NSA was watching them hack into Sony while it was going on. No, but they could go back into the files. And they were so into it that the NSA people could monitor what the North Koreans were monitoring while they were doing the hack. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like watching instant replay. So, when the FBI came out and said, we have very high confidence that this was done by the North Koreans, they usually don't talk like that, and they have no incentive to talk like that.
And that's what led to such weird response from people.
And that, people that I knew before I knew this story about how we knew, people are saying, well, it doesn't seem probable to me, but if the FBI is talking like this, it almost certainly is. Mm-hmm. But a lot of computer experts said, no, I don't believe it. It's probably an inside job. Because part of it was at the cover story on how they knew. Whether using similar signatures and that other people can use similar signatures. But I think at this point, and even I think before my book came out revealing this fact, I think everybody's pretty much come around on the North Koreans as the source.
Is there anything you're more paranoid about now, in a cyber sense?
Oh,
I know it's not something that affects a personal level.
My own personal life.
Things that worry you based on this.
But about me or about the country?
We'll start with you and then the country.
Well, me, not so much. Okay. I mean, look, friends knew that I was writing this book, and so they would ask, well, are you doing anything different? Should I do anything different? Mm-hmm. It's like this. If what you're worried about is somebody hacking into your account, getting into your bank account, or stealing your Netflix password or something, there are things you can do. It's the digital equivalent of putting a better lock on your front door, installing a burglar alarm, getting a bigger dog, something. And they tend to work. Because most of these guys, it's like, Scoop Jackson had this line during the Cold War. He said that the Russians are like a hotel burglar. They go door to door. They try the door. If it's locked, they'll move on to the next one. They're like, so that's kind of what it is. But I would go on. If somebody wants to get into something that you have, really wants to get into it badly, and they're really good at it, and especially if they have the resources of a nation state, there's really nothing you can do. Very little you can do. And so, people would say, the other thing that made me less paranoid personally was, well, are you worried that the NSA is looking at your manuscript or getting into your computer and finding your sources? And on that count, I'm not. Because one thing, and this surprised me, I have to say, the NSA is filled to the gills with lawyers who take their jobs seriously. Mm-hmm. And there are rules and regulations and laws about what you can and cannot do. And I'm not saying they've followed them all the time, but when they don't, it's usually because of a mistake or one bad guy. And there's so many layers of supervision. There's something at the NSA called the Tailored Access Operations Office. This is like the digital cyber black bag operations. Mm-hmm. When the president says, I need you to get into, Osama bin Laden's email or whatever, they're the ones who do it. And I talked with some people who had worked at TAO, and I asked one of them, I said, okay, I'm in your cubicle. What are you doing? What am I, you're at work. What am I seeing? He goes, well, I'm sitting at a monitor, and I'm typing code. And behind me is a supervisor, and behind him is a lawyer, and they're taking down all of my keystrokes. So, it really is, and they have their guidelines. When the Tsarnaev brothers, this isn't in the book either, more bonus material. Yeah. When the Tsarnaev
brothers... And this is the day after the Boston Marathon. So,
the Boston Marathon. Yeah. There was a congressional hearing. They called in, director, deputy director of the NSA. How can all this metadata that you're doing, how come you didn't detect the phone number? How come we didn't hear the Tsarnaev brothers plotting on this on the phone? They said, well, Senator, the legal guideline that we have for extending for monitoring metadata and for extending it is to track the following 3 terrorist organizations. Period. Mm-hmm. Period. They didn't have the legal authority to go going all over the damn place looking for things. So no, are there some people, maybe even journalists, who have contact with suspicious people abroad, and maybe they're being looked at too? Possibly. Mm-hmm. But no, now the flip side of this is, could this change? If this technology had been around when Richard Nixon was president and J. Edgar Hoover was director of the FBI, these guys can get into anything. Right now, the algorithms are set for X. If you wanted to set the algorithms for Y being political opponents, anti-war organizers, whatever, physically it could be done. And a lot of the monitoring of this is internal. So if you took away all of the internal monitors, there wouldn't be... presumably at this point, somebody would leak, somebody would go tell somebody, but
there's no...
Physically, this could be done.
Yeah, there's no mechanism to report that out to the public.
There is a mechanism, but they took away the guy who's doing the mechanism.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, there isn't. Yeah. It's not inherent. So, I told this story, there's a whole chapter in here about the commission that Obama appointed, the 5-man commission.
The 5 guys.
The 5 guys, they call themselves, to go out and see about... is there abuse within the intelligence community, and to suggest some reforms. And one of the people on this commission was a University of Chicago law professor named Jeffrey Stone, who is a civil libertarian. He's on the ACLU advisory board. He's written books about, what happens to the First Amendment during wartime. And after it was all over, he was asked to come give a talk at Fort Meade. What'd you learn? Tell us, what did you come up with? And the report had already been out by this time. And he said, well, look, coming into this job, I'd never been to the NSA before. I'd never been privy to any of this stuff. And these guys were all given highest security clearances and staff. And he goes, based on what I was reading, I thought the NSA was a rogue agency. I said, now, this isn't true. You are doing what your political masters want you to do. Sometimes you make mistakes, but they're pretty much just mistakes. There's not systemic illegal activity. You're pretty much good people. You deserve the American people's respect and appreciation, but you don't deserve their trust. We cannot trust you. His point was there needs to be outside monitoring because the potential for abuse is staggeringly high. I mean, almost imponderably immense.
Total information awareness.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, this is another extra. It's not in my book. I decided not to go there.
I'm like the paperback version for you. This is great.
The total information awareness, which was come up with, it's a guy in DARPA, Admiral Poindexter. He came up with this idea, and it was kind of all above the boards. It was kind of public. You knew about it. And people looked at this and said, no way are we doing this. And the program was killed. The program continued, but it went underground. It's now all top secret, specially compartmented intelligence. It's exactly the same stuff that's going on, but they don't issue public reports about it.
But we end up with
the same system. But there was the Snowden leak.
That's what I was going to say. Once you end up getting a leak like this, it turns out it undermines public trust, I suppose, in this sort of.
Well, the whole this commission that Obama set up, the point of it, and he said so explicitly. Quite honestly, Obama has valued this kind of thing, and his main point was we need to restore trust. That was his number one mandate to this commission: restore trust.
Yeah.
They did more than that. They actually came up with some reforms that are substantive, about half of which were actually implemented and which have had some impact or could have if things get out of hand. But the big thing is trust, and that's what has eroded. I mean, I think though, what's happened in society though. The trust gets a little bit restored for two reasons. One, anytime a terrorist attack happens, it's like the popular view is, hey, tap my phone if you need to. Yeah. That's what it takes to keep the next terrorist attack from happening. Second, at least in the United States, privacy has almost become a quaint notion. We have signed on to 10,000-word agreements that we don't even read.
Sure.
Do you know what a smart TV is? You know what the fine print of the Samsung smart TV says?
You turn the mic on anytime?
It says there's a microphone on the TV. And it's not only monitoring what channels you're watching, which I think everybody kind of assumes is going on, but, and again, I don't know if anyone has ever activated this. I don't know who would activate it. I don't know if it's Samsung. I don't know if it's your cable company. I don't know if it's the FBI with a warrant for your cable company. Based on the book,
I would have to say it would be the Israelis, but go on.
But they can activate a microphone. They could activate a motion detector. So they know not only whether you're watching a show, but whether you've gotten up and gone into the next room while the show is on, or whether you're talking over the show and what you're talking about. I mean, again, I'm not saying Big Brother is listening, but if Big Brother wanted to listen, we brought all the telescreen into our homes. Now, most modern cars are run completely by computers. There are networks in there for our convenience. A network for, online diagnostics. Something's wrong with your car. You don't have to take it to your garage. The guy in the service center can log into your car, look all over the place. Oh, you've got an oil leak, blah, 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 whatever. He can see it remotely. It takes a network to do that. Sometimes the network, or you don't want to learn how to parallel park, push a button, the car will do it for you. How does this work? There's a sensor, how far away the car ahead of you is, how far away the car behind you is, how far away the curb is. The steering wheel is commandeered. Well, this can go further than that. Somebody a year ago, and I was able to work in a footnote to this in the book, did an experiment, hacked into the Jeep Cherokee's network. Somebody took the car out on the road, commandeered the steering wheel, the brakes, the accelerator, the windshield wiper, the radio, everything. Mm-hmm. So if you think about this, you could assassinate someone without really leaving a fingerprint. With a drone strike, there's a crater. Like, oh, well, it must have been a drone strike here. Here, there's a tree. There's a car piled into a tree. It says, oh, the guy just lost track of his car. He lost control of his car. We have asked for this. We have asked for computerized life to make our life more convenient. In some cases, it's not just us, but big companies. The whole thing about critical infrastructure, about 25 years ago when things started getting computerized and on networks, a lot of these, everybody started going online. Banks, dams, electrical grids. Why not? Transfer funds online. Why do you need somebody to fill out a form? It's fast. Power grids. You get these things in the mail all the time. The smart grid. If it's wired over a long distance and there's a surplus of power in sector A and a shortage of power in sector B, a sensor can see this and reroute some of the energy. It's convenient, it's cheap, it's great for everybody, except it's also eminently hackable. And in the Clinton administration, there was a commission that looked into all of this. And what they discovered, to their surprise, because this all kind of grew up without anybody even knowing it.
Sure.
They realized two things. One, everything was going on network. Number two, the CEOs who were in charge of this had no idea that this was creating a problem of vulnerability. Now, eventually, the banks got pretty good at this, because what do banks do? Banks are in the business of, they want your money and they need your trust, and they have a lot of money. So they can spend a lot of money on making the system secure. And yeah, they get hacked a zillion times a day, but it doesn't have that much effect because they have programs and they have people who can detect this very quickly and who can plug the gap. There's a hole here, let's plug it. And they're working all the time. It's a continuous offensive, defensive arms race. If you're a power company,
there's no margin. There's no
margin. This is way off. It's not a crucial part of your business. It's like, okay, you're asking me to spend $10 million to make this secure, and then, as I understand it, next year I'm going to have to do it all over again because the bad guy is going to come up with a way around what I've done. And we've also done the calculation that the cost of cleaning up afterwards, to me anyway, says the power company CEO, isn't that much more than what it would cost to prevent the thing.
Sure.
And there was a time in the Clinton administration, there was some proposals of imposing mandatory security requirements on critical infrastructure, and this was resisted by the companies, by lobbyists, and even by people like the White House Economic Advisor who thought it would impede R&D and make their companies less competitive. So, it's better than it used to be, but it's also, in large portions of our society, not much has changed because there's no incentive to change it.
What do you see as the tension, as we see with the Apple FBI thing, Microsoft and the Department of Justice now, the tension between national security and how corporations are framing their relationship to customers regarding security? Because it's not exactly corporate security, but it's right. What they're protecting for their consumers.
Well, in the old days, all of this was behind the curtain. you know, the context for all of these fights now is, although the one with Microsoft's a little bit different, but we can talk about that. But the context is that there has been cooperation between telecoms and intelligence and law enforcement agencies, you know, going back almost a century. In the 1920s, there was an intelligence agency that persuaded Western Union to give them access to all the telegraphs going in and out of the country. When telephones came along, of course, AT&T, you know, let the FBI or the NSA come in and tap phone circuits. With the internet, it actually got more complicated and more mutually beneficial. Say if you're Microsoft and you want to sell your products to the Defense Department, it has to be vetted for security. Well, who vets this? The NSA. When Microsoft submitted its first Windows operating system, the NSA found 1,500 points of vulnerability. And the NSA then helped them plug the holes. Well, most of them.
Yeah.
They left a few open so that when this was sold to somebody abroad, the NSA knew where the back doors were and they could get in. And everybody was fine with this. In 2009, when Google, with the Chrome system was hacked by the Chinese into the source code, the NSA helped them plug it up, patch it up. When Snowden comes out with his documents, which reveal the full scope of these arrangements, and not all of them were cooperative, some of them were under court order, but still named the companies involved. Right. Then, you know, I say in the book it was like that scene in Casablanca where, you know, Captain Renault says, "I'm shocked that there's gambling going on here," as the croupier delivers his winnings for the night. It's embarrassing, but it has been a part of how they do business. And it's interesting that Apple is the one that's kind of raised the war cry against this because, you know, they don't do that much business with the U.S. government. You know, Google, you'll notice that the other Silicon Valley companies didn't actually
lower
rush.
Profile.
They didn't rush to the barricades. They do business with the government. They didn't want to make trouble. They're fine with these arrangements. And, you know, Google's whole business model is selling your information. Apple, by the way, stores your information. They collect it. They don't sell it.
Right.
They don't sell it. Okay. I'm not... And I think Tim Cook has a genuinely ultra-libertarian outlook on this. You know, it's true, Apple had unlocked at least 70 phones for the government before, which is why they created the iOS operating system.
iOS 8.
Yeah. That's why they got the iOS 8 operating system. Because then the government could say, we need you to unlock this phone, and they could say, well, we can't because
there's just no public key.
The user set the code. We don't know what it is. And then the FBI came up. They said, well, you know, we've discovered this security layer you have where if somebody puts in a false passcode 10 times, all the data is erased. Well, all we want you to do is to tweak that. Yeah. So it doesn't happen after 10 times. It happens after 1,000 times or 10,000 times. And then we'll go in, or hey, you can go in. You can do all of this yourself. We don't have to be in the room. Because there's commercially available software. It's called, you know, where they just go in and just...
Brute force
technique, just 1,000 passcode guesses per second. You'll get it at some point. And I think Apple wasn't expecting the FBI to come up with this little loophole. And then they start, you know, raising a lot of legal objections, which, you know, this case has been dropped. But there will be another case. There will be other cases. And the interesting thing about the state that we are in right now is that all of these legal standards about the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, Privacy Acts, the Ninth Amendment, there is very little case law that applies these fundamental tenets of our society to the digital age. You know, Apple, for example, in their counter motion to the court, said the FBI is trying to force us to write new code. This is mandated speech. No, this is compelled speech.
Yeah.
This is compelled speech and is a violation of our First Amendment.
Lawyers are
I
great.
don't know. Is it a violation of our First Amendment? I don't know. I think there was a case that had nothing to do with this where compelled speech in this sense precisely was called a violation of the First Amendment. It was a lower court. Would this hold up in the Supreme Court? Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment doesn't outlaw search and seizure. It outlaws unlawful search and seizure. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? What is unlawful search and seizure? What is the difference between a warrant that allows someone to come in and ransack my house versus a warrant that allows someone to come in and ransack your iPhone? Is there a difference? If so, why? If so, what is the difference? Nobody has dealt with this. And I think, if Apple were to win one of these cases, there's Dianne Feinstein, liberal from California, who has a bill ready to go, which would require people, companies, to strip away their encryption when presented with a lawful warrant.
To be fair, she also has ties to the defense industry.
She's the chairman of the... Yeah, but I'm just saying, that goes way farther than what the FBI has asked Apple to do. And yet I can imagine a political climate, say if there's another terrorist attack, and the FBI comes to a company with a phone or something that is directly related to a terrorist, to a counterterrorism case. And I can imagine, there used to be in the Cold War fear of being called soft on defense. I can imagine congressmen and senators fearful of being called soft on terror to uphold...
We got the Patriot Act out of this.
Yeah, to uphold a principle that also happens to coincide with the commercial interest of a rich Silicon Valley company. It's a perilous situation. And, I know some people in the software industry who are very much on Apple's side in this whole conflict, who are kind of nervous and who couldn't quite figure out why Tim Cook was making a very big deal out of this particular case, which didn't seem to be... the FBI wanted this to go to court because they thought it was a good case from their point of view. There's no Fourth Amendment issue. The phone was owned by San Bernardino County, which had given consent to do whatever you want with it, Mr. Government. There's no privacy rules. The guy was dead. Privacy rights when you're dead. And the political optics sucked. This is a mass murderer who, was in touch with ISIS. Looked like a pretty good legal case from the FBI's point of view. And, they wanted that to go to court. The only reason why it didn't go to court was because the law that they were invoking, which was the 1789 All Writs Act, the case law over the centuries has come up with some exclusions, so some reasons why you don't have to cooperate with the government when presented with a writ. One of which is if they can get this information some other way.
Right.
And in this case, there are hundreds of companies around the world. All they do is look for vulnerabilities in operating systems, phones, computers, or whatever that nobody else has found. Most government agencies and most companies pay a bounty for this. Apple is one of the few that they don't pay a bounty.
That we know of, or really don't?
Cisco, Google Google says if you can break into our source code, we'll pay you $100,000. It's worth $100,000 to them to
plug
it,
it.
and
Yeah.
then you can tell us how to fix it. So, but I lost my train of thought here.
Apple not doing a bounty.
Oh yeah, so Apple doesn't do a bounty. So
there's
you
other.
can imagine.
Yeah.
Here the FBI is saying this is so secure we can't do it without Apple's help. Apple is saying we are such a secure company we can't let you have a smidgen of it without opening up the whole thing. So you're working at one of these companies and you're thinking, let me give this a try. And so you can imagine that there was a competition, an informal competition among these companies to be the first to come up with a way to break into this phone. But once they did, then FBI had to drop the lawsuit.
Sure. Ostensibly because they achieved their legit goal.
The real objective, I think, was to get a new legal precedent.
Right.
To maintain this near century-long arrangement with the telecoms in a new era of much harder encryption, which, while the NSA can get into this stuff, local police departments, they can't. The FBI, they often can't. And in fact, it's interesting to note, if that phone, if the San Bernardino phone, if there was reason to believe that there was something really important in this phone.
Imminent threat or something.
Yeah. There is something, they could have filled out what's called a request for technical assistance, an RTA, to the NSA, saying, we need you to come here and open up this phone. And that's happened. That's happened lots of times. Not necessarily with iPhones, but with lots of things. They didn't do that because they wanted to create a new legal precedent that would allow them the default right to ask for this sort of thing in the future.
And what do you see as the public's responsibility? We're sort of caught in the middle, as we tend to be in all these things, but is there have we already signed away our rights with that terms of agreement? Are we already, essentially just subject to this war between national security and corporate interests? Which will lead me to my question about the New York primaries today, but that comes later. So.
Comes later. The interesting thing about this, the standard remark might be, vote for a candidate or a party, but this issue kind of goes beyond liberal or conservative, kind of goes beyond Democrat, Republican. Because so many things are interwoven. For example, I could imagine if a case were to come to the Supreme Court and if Judge Scalia were still alive, he might very well take Apple's side in this conflict because he is also very keen on the broadest interpretation of free speech and kind of libertarian notions of being free of government orders, that
Plus,
sort of thing.
Founding fathers didn't have iPhones, so
didn't have iPhones, but I mean, there's the whole kind of, it's more a statist libertarian divide, and that interweaves itself into the Democratic and Republican Party in many often unpredictable ways. So it's hard to, and even at the peak of the outrage about Snowden, I didn't see too many politicians getting into this one way or the other. There's so many snares and sand traps and there are a lot of ways to get trapped into too consistent a position on this sort of thing from a politician's point of view.
I'll give you one now. Snowden, hero or traitor?
Well,
or where do you put him in between?
Well, I should first say I started writing this book before Snowden.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I signed the contract and had done my preliminary research before anybody ever heard of Edward Snowden. So while Snowden certainly enters into this book, he enters into the story, that's not why I wrote the book. I have gained a certain notoriety in some circles for having written a Slate column in January of 2014 after the New York Times wrote an editorial calling for clemency for Snowden because of the valuable service that he has done. I had wanted to stay out of that whole debate because I didn't want to align myself with certain people with whom I otherwise agree with about little. But here's my view on Snowden. If all he had done was to reveal documents, disclose documents that showed that the NSA was involved in domestic surveillance to a much greater extent than anybody realized, then I would have no problem with the guy. I would say that this is a legitimate act of whistleblowing, and he should be championed. He's probably going to go to jail for a little while, but
public service. That was a public service.
You know, most whistleblowers, they say, I'm willing to go to jail for this. You know, Dan Ellsberg, if the FBI hadn't tried to hire his judge, and therefore the judge, the Nixon administration wanted to make him FBI director, and he declared a mistrial on judicial interference, he probably would have gone to jail, and he realizes this. But Snowden did much more than that. A lot of these documents, based on stories that were published in the Post and the Guardian and elsewhere, it wasn't just about domestic surveillance. It was about intercepts of email by the Taliban in the Northwest Territories of Pakistan. It was about, in interviews, he would talk about how many computers the NSA was hacking into in China and Hong Kong. It was about programs that the CIA had to vet the reliability of spies in Pakistan, about the nuclear program in Iraq, a detailed itemization of the CIA budget. I mean, the point is, this isn't whistleblowing. This is, again, you can disagree with the U.S. policy in Afghanistan or any of these other places. You might think that all this is, evil, and that's a legitimate position. But what this is about, what he was doing, was basically trying to take down an intelligence agency. He was leaking material on activities that are well within the legal charter of the NSA. This is what the NSA does. It intercepts foreign intelligence. Right. That is its public charter. Like, everybody knows this. And, I hear people like Laura Poitras saying, well, foreigners have privacy rights too. And, well, you show me where that's the case. There are international conventions on human rights and laws of war. There is no international document which says that you, someone in Pakistan, have the right not to be hacked by the NSA. Right. Or for that matter, let's keep going on this, or by the Russian equivalent of the NSA, or the Chinese equivalent of the NSA, which these people never say anything about, even though they're hacking just as much as we are. So I'm just kind of disturbed that, look, traitor is going too far, because treason is actually the one crime that the Constitution defines explicitly. It is, working on behalf of, consorting with, to the benefit of an enemy in time of war. Well, we're not at war with Russia. We're not at war with China. If it had been shown that Ed Snowden was leaking stuff to the Taliban or to the Iraqi insurgents, then that would have been treason as defined by the Constitution. But it wasn't. So it's not treason. But it's not, only a small fraction of what he did is something that I would describe as legitimate whistleblowing. And the rest of it, if he thinks it's whistleblowing, or if other people do, I think they're being disingenuous or naive. Did you have a mistrust of political systems when you were growing up? Because we talked a little about your background.
Still do. Yeah, but did it start at the root? Did you have that prior to the career that you took up? And we talked a little about how you became the Fred Kaplan we all know and love last time we spoke. But I wonder now, were you raised in a sort of environment where this isn't
I wasn't raised in a terribly political... My parents were dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. You know, they were young people in the Depression. They worshipped FDR. And I think at one point in my youth, they worked for... They were volunteers for... You know, they were members of the United Nations Association, and my mother was a volunteer for the League of Women Voters when at polls during elections. But they were by no means radicals or distrusting the government. The government was a good thing.
Yeah. So you learn to mistrust it over time.
But I was born in 1954. I mean, let's state the context. So, the Vietnam War started when I was about 10. But the protests to the Vietnam War really got underway when I was about 14. And, about that time I started getting, as anybody with a brain would start getting, skeptical about the government. And, you look at people like Nixon and Hoover, and then when things started coming out about, like, COINTELPRO and Watergate, and then, of course... 1974, I was 20. That was the year of the Church Committee hearings, which was all about crimes and malfeasances committed by the CIA and the NSA, both at home and abroad. This obviously had a major impact on my thinking. It doesn't mean that I think that that the NSA of today is the same NSA that was going on in that time. However, I also believe that potentially it could be. If you read my book, and if you want to know where because it's a story. It tells. I don't intrude very much into this book.
No.
But where am I in this book? Where's my view? Mm-hmm. It's basically the view of the next to last chapter, which was about this 5-member commission. And that chapter ends with the story that I told you about Jeffrey Stone saying in the speech that, you people of the NSA, you deserve our respect and appreciation, but not our trust, because there's always a potential for abuse, and that we have to be on the constant watch for that.
Last time we spoke, good, that's your phone telling you, the NSA is calling. Mm-hmm. Last time we spoke, I joked about Syrian rebels being armed over the Iraqi border and how ironic that was, given that Iraq's insurgents are being armed over the Syrian border years before. Right. Parallels between how we're trying to deal with ISIS versus how we functioned in Iraq previously?
In the cyber thing? Or?
Yeah. Is there any...
Well, look, it has been said, I believe... the current director of the NSA has said publicly that we have cyber operations going on against ISIS. What does this mean? I honestly don't know.
Okay.
What I was describing earlier, the kinds of things that the NSA and Joint Special Operations Command were doing jointly against insurgents in Iraq in 2007, sending them false messages, disrupting their own communications, luring them to places and then killing them, that sort of thing. If we weren't doing that sort of thing against ISIS, I would be puzzled and want to know why.
But at the same time, we don't find, as you didn't find out with the insurgency, you don't find out until years later. To tell you the truth, if I did find out what we were doing, I'm not sure. There are a couple of things that I pieced together in the course of my research that I then went to get confirmed with people I trusted, and was persuaded that I shouldn't print that. Listen, there's a lot of things in this book that are technically speaking classified. I wasn't interested in blowing ongoing operations that I think if I told you what they were, you would agree without much thinking that, that's something that really... That's a worthwhile pursuit.
Yeah. I think that really does deserve to be secret, and B, I'm a little sorry that I even know about it myself.
Yeah.
So, there is an interesting scene in Laura Poitras' film about Snowden, Citizen 4.
You haven't seen it yet.
Very well-made film. She's an excellent filmmaker. But there's one scene where Ed Snowden is explaining to Glenn Greenwald these documents that he's turned over. And he's saying, now, some of these documents really are legitimately classified, and grave damage could be done if they got out. So I'm trusting you to be
show discretion.
To be careful with this. And I'm thinking, what? Why would you trust Glenn Greenwald? Why would you trust me? Yeah. Why did you take these out of the building to begin with? Once they're out of the building, it's up for grabs. I mean, really, quite honestly, the reporters dealing with this, they say, I've encrypted my files. Commercial encryption, it's not going to hack. I am convinced. Let's say that Ed Snowden, that the Russians did not pry this stuff out of Snowden, that he didn't have it when he went to Russia. They have it by now. Mm-hmm. It's out there. Once it left the NSA complex, it is out there. Once people know it exists, they will find a way to get it. I would be very, very surprised if the Russians and the Chinese and maybe some other people too didn't have everything that Ed Snowden took out of his Hawaii complex with him by this point.
Just took him too long to read it all. So
it's very long.
Yeah. It's no Panama Papers. So, last question.
And then I've got to
go. Great jazz album besides Dave Douglas's Dark Territory.
Yes. So just yesterday, Henry Threadgill won the Pulitzer Prize for music. It was for an album that he put out about a year ago. But he has come out with an album just in the last 2 weeks called Old Locks and Irregular Verbs.
Okay.
Which is a masterpiece. I mean, it is a through-composed work for an ensemble that consists of 2 alto saxophones, 2 pianos, a cello, a tuba, and drums. There's improvisation in it too, and it's one of the greatest jazz albums I've heard in years. I don't know if they would do this, but he deserves to win a second Pulitzer Prize next year for this album.
Very good. Real final question, because it's New York primary day. Yeah. Trump, Cruz, or Kasich? Who did you vote for? Fred Kaplan, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memory Show.
Thank you.
And that was Fred Kaplan. His new book is Dark Territory, The Secret History of Cyber War, from Simon & Schuster. I enjoyed the heck out of it, even if it does scare the heck out of me. You should also check out Fred's work at Slate.com, where he writes the War Stories column regularly. And you can find all of his work at fredkaplan.info, I-N-F-O. And that includes his jazz blog, which will turn you on to a completely different section of mankind's pursuits. Beyond the warfare side, there's got to be some room for art, right? Our next segment is a monthly feature for the Virtual Memories Show. Charles Bivona, known as #NJPoet, is back for his 15-minute segment about poetry, teaching, and the intersection of the virtual and physical worlds. And now, NJ Poet's Corner with Charles Bivona. All right, so Chuck, last time you were on, we asked what your dream course would be, a physical course, like an in real life course to teach. And you said Batman studies. What would go into the course? Tell me about Batman studies.
Well, Batman studies is a way to get past the resistance that students have for literature. It's a lot easier to get them to see Batman as a literary character and then show them how Batman has been derived from literary characters from the past. So I would probably start by watching Batman Begins, because that's my personal favorite. And I would try to spin that into a discussion about Odysseus, because I feel like there's a lot of Odysseus in Batman, that wily problem solving, if you watch the cartoons and you read the Odyssey, you'll see a lot of that where, there's a situation that a normal person probably couldn't get out of, but Batman has got a contingency plan and a contingency plan for the failure of that contingency plan. And it's kind of Odysseus to the nth degree, to the comic book level. But once I did that, I really would probably try to go from Odysseus into Plato and talk a little bit more about how we could read Batman through the lenses of various literary theories. I would try to do a Marxist analysis of Batman in the sense that
he's a rich guy who
he's a rich guy. I mean, if my parents, what do they?
He's a rich guy who goes out and beats up underprivileged criminals.
Well, in the sense that if my parents were killed in an alley, I couldn't afford to spend my life becoming a ninja to avenge them. So, I mean, there is that economic quality to it. You could very easily do a feminist reading and take a look at, the women in Batman versus the women he falls in love with versus the women that Bruce Wayne falls in love with versus the women that Batman falls in love with, and what that says about how society sees women, and how someone who is over the edge as Batman probably can't love what this society deems the feminine. Catwoman would be a great way to get into that discussion. Why are you so hung up on it being a real life class? That's my question to you.
I just wondered, because you talked about doing virtual classes, so I thought, if you were going to sit down with people in a room, what would it be? And how does that environment differ from some of the online teaching that you've done?
Online teaching has been sort of a fallback because I couldn't afford to keep doing the in-life teaching. They don't pay enough. The commute is crazy. Because in order to survive that life, you have to teach at 2 or 3 universities a semester. So you spend most of your time in the car. You're teaching too many students, and I'm just too old. My health can't take it. So ideally, I've always said that I believe that the best pedagogical way to go about this would be to have a combination of virtual and classroom. Toward the end of my time at Rutgers, I was toying with the idea of putting my text message phone number on the board so that shy students could text me questions instead of having to go through that whole, everyone look at me, I don't know something. So, to bring it back to Batman, the reason I hooked on Batman is because I found that when I was trying to teach literature in the beginning of my career, the only way I could get students to see a lot of the themes that were being played out in a lot of these books, Antigone and Oedipus and the old base of everything stuff. Mm-hmm. The only way I could get them to really appreciate what was going on in these texts thematically was to relate it back to films. And because I'm me, and because Batman had such a profound effect on my life as a human being, as a person, as an abused child, as a scholar, as a writer, as a poet, I found that I was always falling back on Batman. So it became a joke, that I should do a course on Batman. And this was before the second wave of Batman came out, when Batman Begins came out, and it became like, oh, now we're going to really look at
Christopher
Batman.
Nolan
yeah. And now it would be even easier to teach this course because there are tons of documentaries out there, the psychology of Batman, the philosophy of Batman. I could also go in a Buddhist direction and talk about how this is really a guy who's living by the samurai code. That whole scene in Ra's al Ghul's house where he wants Bruce Wayne to execute the criminal. I mean, that's the difference between a samurai and a ninja, right? A samurai is someone who fights for an honorable cause, and a ninja is just a hand of vengeance, really for hire too. Mm-hmm. So there's that ethical interplay between the vigilantism, which is interestingly playing out in the Daredevil on Netflix right now too.
Oh, I haven't watched.
Oh, you should. If we expanded this beyond Batman, we're at the point now where I could just really teach a very good literature course on superheroes in general. Like, where have we seen these superheroes before? And that would be a ton of fun. And I think the students would really respond to it because they're not afraid of comic books. And what I mean by that is I meet a lot of students who have been browbeaten by education, and they're completely turned off to academia. They're completely turned off to universities. They're completely turned off to professors. I mean, when people find out I'm a professor, it changes the social dynamic because they think they're being judged. They think I'm correcting them in my mind, all this kind of stuff that they're used to. So they've been turned off to education, but they confuse education with knowledge, and they confuse the learning industry, as I call it, with, the real essence of human education, which is, you learn from your life, which is another way to get into Batman, right? I mean, here's this guy who could have gone to any school that he wanted to, and he did. There's that scene in the beginning of Batman Begins when he comes back from Princeton, and he says, "I'm not going back. Princeton doesn't like me."
A New Jersey thing, I guess.
New Jersey thing, yeah. Well, but I mean, the possibilities are limitless, and the overall point of it is that I think we're at a time in literary studies where a lot of people are turned off to the study of literature. So I mean, a lot of people who are trying very sincerely and with a lot of passion to write their own literature. And because they've been turned off to history and politics and philosophy and literary theory,
right,
they are struggling in ways that they blame themselves for. So it turns into this kind of psychological feedback loop where I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And really,
this is too abstruse for anyone to get.
Yeah. And really all the problem is you're trying to engage in a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years without first familiarizing yourself with the conversation. And I've had some frustrating conversations with poets and writers and actors and actresses and all kinds of artists who they seem to think that it's possible to create art without a theory of art. And they don't understand that even trying to create art without theory is a theory. I sound like Delaney now. No, but Delaney...
You're much briefer about it.
I would bring Delaney into it too, because Delaney he justifies the idea of Batman studies too. He's that book he wrote on writing. Did you read that one? Yeah. He there's a passage in there where he points out, very, very cogently, that education is painful. It's uncomfortable to admit that you don't know things. Accepting ignorance, saying I'm ignorant about X, is the first step to learning about X, and people don't like that. It puts them in a vulnerable position. So as a teacher, I've always found that I needed to find a way to kind of, I guess you could say, Zen master people and to, do a little Sun Tzu, kind of like, we're going to talk about something that you don't think has anything to do with literature, But at the end of the class, I'm going to make you realize we've been talking about literature all along. And that has been an effective teaching model for me. And because of that, I'm always on the hunt for, what does this remind me of? Like the TV series Arrow. I call that Hamlet on crack. I mean, if you've ever watched the first episode, it's Hamlet on crack.
No, I do Crazy Ex-Girlfriend on the same channel. That's the only one I watch.
Well, that's why these stories resonate with people. I mean, the stories of one man rising up or one woman rising up and taking matters into their own hand and developing a skill, their skills to the point where they're damn near superhuman, So probably as a wrap-up of the course, I would probably ask people to do some kind of a character analysis of this man, Batman. Like, who is this guy? What kind of person does this? And I think that the Batman Begins movie and the one that came after it really are the two best explorations of, how close to psychotic are you really if you're running around at night beating up criminals in a bat suit, And I just think that that's a great way to take conversations that are happening in current politics and show people how the literature is kind of a roadmap for these conversations. Because, there's nothing new under the sun. You know that. No one's talking about anything new.
Right. What was your favorite era of Batman?
Oh.
Personal favorite, as opposed to the movies being a good entree.
All right, well, I'll give you a quick kind of like
West.
Batman and Me memoir. When my father's war trauma really kind of got bad, we had to like run and live with one of my aunts, and I didn't have any friends. It was like literally one town over, but when you're a kid, that might as well be another planet. And the only solace I had was there was a comic book store on the corner, so I would take whatever little money I got as an allowance. Remember, comic books were 25 cents a piece. So
This is all my addiction too.
Yeah. So I really started with Spider-Man because teenager gets superpowers, still has problems. Wow. Okay.
I'm down.
Batman came later. Batman was more of a what if my father comes back, because he did try a couple times to kill or kidnap my mom or me or my brother. So there was this like trauma overload of what if he comes back, and that's when I found Batman. And there was just this idea of you can prepare yourself to be ready for anything. Of course, because of my depression, that became an obsession with the gym that led to all kinds of injuries and
Which again, Batman never has to deal with.
Well, Batman does
Stress
deal with them, but he
fractures
talks
and
about them almost like, you should see my x-rays. Ha, 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 ha. So, I mean, you have to be careful when you're using myth as a model for your real life. Part of the lesson that you have to learn is, it's larger than life to make a point. But I think that we are at a period in economic history where the only way you're going to make a living is if you become a little bit of a Batman. Like, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to find a way. There's an episode of the Justice League where Batman is fighting against some guy with magic powers who can like manipulate your mind. And the guy says, they're foolish to send you after me. You're the only one with no superpowers. And he says, oh, I have a superpower. I never give up, And then he also says something like, my mind is not a great place to be. So there's this kind of sense of almost like, you don't understand how screwed up I really am. And I'm holding it together and doing good, but don't poke me, which is kind of dysfunctional and scary that I find that in Batman, I guess. But at the end of the day, I'm upset with how Batman is being betrayed, too. I should mention that.
How so?
Do you remember when Robin was killed in the comic books?
In the 90s, they
in
had
the
a
90s.
call-in to see whether they should
everyone
kill
said,
Robin off.
well, it wasn't
and
even
everybody-
Robin. It was the second Robin. It wasn't Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
So do you remember after Robin was killed, the big dramatic thing that happened was Batman for a brief period started carrying a gun.
That I don't remember. I think I'd already left at that point. But,
I remember they actually had a cover of one of the Batman issues where he had a holster on. It was like a big deal. It's like, this is, and the thing was, he'd never really actually had the gun. It was just like, is this going to be what finally turns him into, the Joker? Is he finally going to just start killing people? Is he going to become the Punisher? And now he drives a tank.
Which, if anything, is just reflective of the rise of the warrior cop.
The other thing, the other way to read that would be interesting to do a Batman course would to look at how the portrayal of Batman has changed in mass culture as the culture has changed.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he used to be basically the master detective who figured out a way to screw you without having to beat you up, and if it came to it, he could beat you up.
But just a quick sock on the jaw, nothing.
Quick
that was,
sock on the jaw, yeah. Bap, knocks
ripping
you out.
arms off or anything.
Now
Yeah.
now he's breaking people's bones, and
And again, driving a tank. He's like
Driving a tank.
our local police,
Right.
But
But then you'd have to get it if you wanted to do that. We'd have to get into the politics of Frank Miller, then, wouldn't we?
Yeah, Miller was certainly the guy who.
Well,
who
Miller
started
had a
that
lot
out.
to say during Occupy Wall Street. that was really right-wing conservative.
At that point, he'd already become largely irrelevant to comic circles, though.
Well, they all say that he's the guy who gave Batman back his balls. They say that, right? I'm sorry, I know this is a cultural class.
Oh, no.
That's what they say.
That was the thing in the mid-'80s. He was the one who made the character relevant again.
Right.
In part by turning it into Dirty Harry.
Dirty Harry.
Yeah. And having him beat up Superman, which we
I
now
have not seen Batman versus Superman yet. I was going to go as like homework for this. But I still haven't seen the third installment of Bale's Batman.
Oh, me neither.
Because what I heard about it made me think, they're not, they're straying from the story now. Now they're just kind of making it.
But that also runs a possible direction for what you'd want to teach in terms of what it means to work on a myth that's owned by a corporation.
Right. So really what it is really what a Batman Studies course is it's a way to get students to go through these intellectual motions, these critical ways of thinking with a text that they're comfortable with. Not just comfortable with, they're obsessed with. I mean, my students, whenever I help one of my students get a job, they go, well, you really are Batman. It's just like, and one of my jokes, whenever someone says, why don't you try to woo one of these publishing companies with your Twitter following or something like that, I always say to my writer friends, and I don't care what the publishing companies think of me. Only Google's opinion matters right now. And if Google says you're Batman, you're Batman. So I mean, there's all kinds of metaphors that I've used, Batman metaphors, to survive depression, to survive child abuse, to survive losing a job that I loved for screwed up reasons, to motivate myself when everyone else said I was crazy for doing what I was doing. It keeps coming back to Batman. Like, well, yeah, you don't get what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm Batman. You're not. I think it's a healthy arrogance that will get you past a lot of barriers in life. So that would be the Batman course. And I would teach it, and the administrators would tell me that I was posing as a faux psychologist. I mean, it's a mess.
Understood. Charles Pavona, thanks so much for coming back on the Virtual Memory Show.
See you next month.
And that was NJ Poets Corner with Charles Pavona. Chuck's at charlesbavona.com, but you should just follow him on Twitter at Charles Bavona. That's Bivona. He'll be back next month. For now, you should visit njpoet.com/book and order the chapbook of Chuck's poetry, #NJPoet, published by Indigent Press. Also, go pick up Fred Kaplan's Dark Territory, The Secret History of Cyber War. It's from Simon & Schuster and available in bookstores everywhere. Now, after our conversations, I asked Fred and Chuck each, so, who are you reading? And if you want to hear their answers to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the show so you can get access to our monthly podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or at paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast, a patron-only blog, series of ebooks I'm trying to launch, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. And if you don't like Patreon, just go to paypal.me/VMSpod and make a donation that way. If you do, you'll get access to the exact same material through fearofasquareplanet.com. Now, special thanks go out to Paul W. Jones, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Andrew Mason, and Zach Martin for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of show supporters at our website, chimeraobscura.com/VM. This episode was recorded at Fred's home in Prospect Park last Friday. The tolls to get out to Brooklyn and back added up to about $28, which is kind of heavy, but I found street parking, so, that balanced out. Of course, there was also a coffee purchase in there at Grumpy's. Good stuff. Pour over. I was happy. If you want to help defray some of the costs, visit patreon.com/VMSpod and help me out. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band, David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/davidanddavidmusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. I have no one booked for next week, but I'm not too worried. It's a pretty stressful time at my day job. There's a big negotiation going on that's sort of coming to a head this week. I've got a trade show in the middle of that that's going to carry over for a few weeks, so things might be a little touchy for a while, but I'll feel bad if I don't have a show for you. I know that, but I'm not in crisis of faith mode like I was a few weeks back. It'll work out. And if it doesn't, I promise to have a mega show for you the following week, okay? Until next time, you can subscribe to the show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter at vmspod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Until next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.